Hi, I'm calling the meeting of the May 1st Planning Board to order. And first, I'm going to introduce the planning board members who are very busy chatting. To my left, we have Sean Henry and David Rosen. We have our planner, Greg Catamatori. We have Beverly Bookin, Doug Cook, and Steve Yost, and I'm Jane Remsen, the vice chair, but acting chair tonight since we are missing our chair. So the first thing on our agenda is an approval not required plan submitted by Robert Serafine for a division of land at Thompson Street, Assessor's Map 241, Lot 7. And I believe we've received a request to continue that until May 15th.
Yes, you have.
So I will accept a motion from someone who wants to be the motion maker. Beverly.
No, I don't have.
Oh, okay.
particulars in front of me. I have someone.
Who's ready to make a motion? Sean.
I make a motion to continue the approval not required plan submitted by Robert Serafine until May 15th.
I'll second.
So moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? My chairing skills are so rusty. I think we are going to, because we are expecting some other people for the 20 Main Street and the GZO dimensional requirements, we're going to take these a little out of order. So I think we're going to take the demo delay next. So in accordance with the provision of MGL Chapter 40A, Section 5, and the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance, Section 1.11, the Planning Board shall consider the following proposed zoning amendment. Amend the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance by adding a new Section 5.21 demolition delay with the purpose of preserving historically significant structures by determining the historical significance of structures and if structures are preferably preserved by the Historical Commission and delaying demolition as part of the demolition permitting process of the building commissioner. So last time, Councillor Worthley was here to present this demo delay, and we discovered that it, in fact, does not belong in the Gloucester zoning ordinance. And we continued the public hearing in order to give him time to sort that out and present the zoning ordinance to the city council or do whatever administrative thing he had to do. And so where are we now?
So I don't think that occurred. There was another planning and development meeting cycle that was missed. And my understanding is the intention is for him to appear at the meeting next Wednesday and withdraw the proposal as a zoning ordinance at that stage, which then will be confirmed by the city council at the following meeting.
Okay, so then I think the best thing to do is to continue to our next scheduled meeting of May 15th and hope that that administrative business gets sorted out by then. So I will, if you all agree, I will entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to May 15th, our next scheduled meeting. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the public hearing is continued to May 15th. So what do you want to do next?
I'm just realizing that Sean McCormick is online. So if
Okay,
you'd like
great.
to take that.
So we will open the public hearing for 20 Main Street. In accordance with the provisions of MGL Chapter 41 and the rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land in Gloucester, the Gloucester Planning Board will consider a two-lot definitive subdivision plan filed by 20 Main LLC entitled Chisholm Court Extension at 20 Main Street, Assessor's Map 7, Lot 94. And Sean McCormick is here. Attorney McCormick, hello.
Hi there. I just realized I have a silly background. Please forgive me for that.
I think it's very elegant.
So thank you. My name is Sean McCormick. My office is at 1 Boston Place, Boston, Massachusetts. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, 20 Main Street. My intent tonight was to give everyone an update on where both the subdivision plan is and the parallel development that is been approved by the city and which is in litigation right now. And ultimately to ask for yet another continuance until the June 26th hearing, which my hope would be the final continuance, because I believe that by that date, we will either withdraw this plan, or we will be prepared to make a full presentation that night and be seeking approval. As you know, we have continued this many times, partly because there's a sense that it's a little confusing to be talking about two different developments at the same parcel at the same time. In addition to the definitive subdivision plan, this parcel has been approved for a mixed-use development. That approval was appealed by abutters. That appeal is pending in the Essex Superior Court. Since I submitted my last continuance request in the middle of last month, we now have a hearing date for a motion to dismiss on May 20. My expectation is that we will have an answer as to whether that case will proceed by the first week in June, which will give us ample time to either prepare a presentation, come in to the planning board and seek approval of the definitive plan, where we're addressing the comments that we got from Weston and Sampson, or alternatively, we will be withdrawing the petition as moot. I'm happy to answer any questions
you.
that anyone has about the status or anything else.
Thank you. Do any planning board members have any comments or clarifying questions?
I was just a little confused about which of the proposals, the initial one or the later one will be brought forward.
This public hearing is about the 2-lot subdivision, so not the building. Subdivision of land, right? Yeah.
The legal question. If the Essex court dismisses the case, can it be appealed by the folks who brought it?
Madam Chair, would you mind repeating the question so
Oh,
it's
sure.
more audible?
Beverly Bookins said if the court dismisses the case, can it be appealed by the plaintiff? No, whoever's brought the case.
So sure, there would be a right to appeal. My hope and also my belief is that that would not affect our decision-making on the definitive plan, and in that in any event, we would either be withdrawing or proceeding in earnest on June 26th.
Yeah.
Like, Catherine, did you have an issue?
I do. I'm not necessarily with this hearing, but I'm not getting any audio with if people could use the microphones. So if you could please, I ask the chair to repeat the motions in a second so I can be sure to get them.
Oh, yes. As I
And-
said, my chairing skills are so rusty.
And I'll need the first public hearing repeated for me. Just who made the motion in second. Please, thank you.
Okay, once we're done with this public hearing, I'll do that. Okay, back to Chisholm Court. Anybody else have any comments to make? No, well, I will speak for the planning board just in saying, Attorney McCormick, we really will expect you either to withdraw or make a significant advancement on June 26th, because I just feel that this has been going on for incredibly long time. So we would really appreciate it if we could have some type of resolution on June 26th.
I think that is an absolutely fair request, Madam Chair.
Okay, that being said, I will entertain a motion to continue the public hearing for Chisholm Court Extension at 20 Main Street until our scheduled meeting of June 26th.
So move.
Second?
So Beverly Bookin made the motion and Sean Henry seconded. All in favor?
I,
Opposed? The motion passes unanimously. So before we move on to the next thing, let me just, for Catherine's sake, back up a little bit. 20 Main Street, no, was that it? No, sorry, it was for the demolition delay, section 5.21. And for the ANR, for both of those, Beverly Bookin made the motion and Sean Henry seconded. Sorry, Sean Henry made the motion and Beverly Bookin seconded, and they were each unanimous. Okay, are we good? Yes. So thank you, Attorney McCormick, very much. We expect to see you on June 26th.
Thank you for your time and accommodation.
Okay. Everyone who's listening, bear with me. Our next public hearing is for the proposed, don't. I've just been told I don't have to read it in my entirety to everyone's relief, but I will read a little bit of it. This is for the proposed zoning amendment to dimensional requirements. In accordance with the provisions of MGL Chapter 48, Section 5, and the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance Section 1.11, the Planning Board shall consider the following proposed zoning amendment. Amend the Gloucester zoning ordinance by amending Section 3 dimensional requirements by adding a new section 3.1.9, change of use without exterior changes. And I am not going to read the whole thing. I believe we have our city solicitor, Suzanne Egan, here to discuss what's next. At the last meeting, we had asked for her opinion before we proceeded to evaluate the zoning amendment.
And I also would just summarize that since that initially, we only discussed this once, the planning board also referred the proposed ordinance to the zoning board. They discussed it at their meeting, I believe it may have been just last week, if not the week before. Very brief summary was provided by the chair. I think they shared similar sentiments of the concern of that there's a lot of possibilities of change of use that are identified in the proposed ordinance, either by right, by variance, or by special permit, and that there certainly could be relevance to setbacks that would now be in a situation where they might need a variance for a change of use, where this ordinance would essentially absolve them of having to comply with the zoning ordinance. And they felt that there are certainly aspects of a project relating to a variance that, according to how the ordinance has been devised in Gloucester, that the board, as well as the public, has the right to be heard on the concerns that might be introduced by a variance with that change of use.
Thank you, Suzanne Egan.
Thank you. Good evening. Suzanne Egan, General Counsel for the City of Gloucester. So I have reviewed the proposed ordinance, and whenever we look at a zoning ordinance, it's important to look at how it matches up with General Law Chapter 40A. And this ordinance particularly impacts Section 6 of Chapter 40A, which talks about changes in use of property and whether or not once a property or a structure, the use is changed, whether or not that use has to comply. The additional construction, any alteration, expansion, or structural changes to the building have to comply with the zoning that's in existence at the time. So because of that's essentially what this zoning proposal does, is it states that any, essentially, I'll paraphrase it, it may not be exactly right. Any non-conforming structure, whether it's through non-conforming through a variance, a special permit, or it's a pre-existing non-conforming structure, if that structure has a change of use, as long as there's no exterior changes, all of the zoning dimensions contained in our zoning ordinance in section 3 do not apply to that structure, which is inconsistent with chapter 40A, section 6. And so whenever we have a proposal that's inconsistent with the general law, I would advise against adopting that zoning amendment. And if there is a certain purpose or desire that in, the amendment, to instead look at it specifically and see how we can adopt a zoning ordinance that meets some of the needs that are trying to be addressed, as opposed to having such a broad brush stroke and saying that pre-existing, or just saying that non-conforming structures don't have to comply with any zoning dimensions. So I can answer any questions or elaborate further if you would like me to.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? No, that seems really straightforward.
Okay.
It's in conflict with Mass General Law.
Yes. Yep.
End of story.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we are in a public hearing. If there's any members of the public that want to make a comment about this, okay. Okay, so what do we do?
If you're not, it doesn't look like there's anybody that's raised their hand
online.
online.
I forgot
as
about
well
online.
as nobody in the room. You can close the public meeting as the chair.
Okay.
Public hearing, I should say.
Yep. So if there's anyone online who wishes to make a comment about this issue, please raise your hand electronically. Give a second. Okay, I don't see anyone. Then I will close the public hearing. And planning board members, do you have any comments at this time? Or actually, Greg, can you just tell us what stage we're at?
Yes, so this was referred by the initiated by the full city council. So our ordinance, as well as 40A, require the planning board to hold a public hearing, as well as the city council, in order to enact a measure. So after your public hearing, you are making a recommendation to the city council whether or not to adopt as proposed or modified by the board the proposed amendment. From there, that recommendation will go to planning and development, where they will take it up and discuss it and make their recommendation to the full city council, and then the city council will hold a public hearing. And I believe I'm not sure when theirs is scheduled. It may already have opened and continued because of the amount of time it's spent at the planning board. So motions are always in the affirmative of recommending to the city council the adoption. And then obviously your commentary in this discussion is reflected in the transmission of the vote to the council.
Okay. Does that make sense? So eventually after we're finished discussing, we're going to make a motion to recommend this to the city council, and we'll either vote yay or nay in favor or against that motion. Or we could recommend that the ordinance be modified. But I was never exactly sure what the purpose of the ordinance was. It's a bit confusing. And so I don't see any need to wade in and try to modify it into something when I'm not exactly sure what the proposed purpose is.
Even, I think the purpose was to just reduce unnecessary land use review on something in order to facilitate these kinds of things in terms of reducing costs for internal. I think that was the basic reason, but my concern is I wouldn't know where to begin to modify it because it's a pretty straightforward issue and it's very complex. I mean, it would seem every property could have a different set of circumstances. And this is a kind of regulation we're trying to apply it And a blanket across the city could be very problematic. So that's the reason why I think it's probably not worth going for. Even if the initial gist of doing it or
Intent, right,
intent
was- right.
was in good faith. Let's put it that way.
Right. Anybody else have any comments?
Just that I appreciated the memo that Solicitor Egan sent to us and that Greg forwarded. It was very clear.
Tom?
I agree with Member Rosen. And I think, given that it does not comply with state law, that it makes sense to reject it. And a related topic, I think I have at least one of our ordinances that come to mind that also violates state law that we should correct sooner rather than later. We attempted to do with our zoning amendments last time to treat all two-family uses exactly the same, and we failed to pass that amendment back then. And Attorney Egan can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that state law mandates that the same use is treated the same regardless of how you get there. So again, off topic for right now, but I think it's something that should be on our agenda to facilitate as soon as possible.
I agree.
I had a comment that even ignoring what the council enlightened us about, if we were to try to infer what the proposal intended, I think that would be difficult. I found it both too open with respect to what a change of use can be, and as we stated before, how that might relate to setback requirements. For instance, going from residential to commercial. So both too open and also in the various clauses too ambiguous. So I think it would be a huge task for us to get it right while trying to maintain whatever was meant.
Thank you. So if nobody else has any more comments, I will entertain a motion to recommend that the city council amend the Gloucester zoning ordinance by amending section 3 dimensional requirements. So I need a second, or I need a motion, I mean. Okay, a
A second.
motion by David Rosen,
Second?
second by Sean Henry. All in favor? Any opposed? No.
Oh,
So we are unanimous in not recommending the zoning ordinance to the city council. Thank you, everyone. Okay, other business. I'm a huge fan of leaving minutes to the end, so let's do that. Multifamily overlay district zoning ordinance referendum debrief. So I wanted to share with all of you. It looks like it's just the planning board at this point. Let's just see. Nope, there's a few people online. I wanted to share with all of you, Sean and David's and my thoughts about the zoning referendum and work that we did, and also kind of the lessons learned and where we go from here. So I do have a tiny PowerPoint. Can I share my screen, or do I need, oh, go me as the chair. Yeah. But now all this stuff is in the way. I know, but I like it. Yes, it's under this panel. I want this panel to go away so I can see. Love that. I'm going to. There we go. From the beginning. Okay. So, look, so pretty.
My choice.
And, oh, let's see. And if I do presenter view, do you guys all see that? No, even better. Okay. Yes, good. I made it really big for you. Okay, lessons that we learned from the special election. What the voters told us. This is what we think we heard. Some of the voters did not feel heard, and this is what led to the petition. I just need to move all these ridiculous panels around. Hold on. Okay. Some of them had a big fear of overdevelopment or being forced to build. This was a big misunderstanding. A lot of people said, zone it and they will build. And there were all the Shaw's rumors that we were going to end up putting hundreds of units on top of Shaw's, which of course was not true at all because the Shaw's was never in any of the proposed districts. There was a major distrust of the process and a fear of loss of local control. That state mandates meant the state would have control over Gloucester zoning, a suspicion of outside influence or developers, and Gloucester residents losing control over the type of growth that they wanted to see in Gloucester, which for some people is actually no growth, surprisingly enough. There was also confusion about what the plan does, who benefits and how. There were concerns about infrastructure. We heard about schools, water, wastewater, traffic, parking, all of which are very valid concerns and we tried to address. There was definitely a frustration that the whole city was not sharing the burden in the sense that we weren't asking for multifamily to be anywhere other than the districts, and most of the districts were in that half-mile radius of the downtown. And we know that that's because the 3A mandate was that at least 50% be inside the half-mile radius, and also because there's a density formula and so on. And so for putting some of the zoning outside of that circle would have put actually more of a burden on the inside of the circle. But it was very hard to explain, and also a valid concern that the whole city was not sharing the burden. On the flip side, housing advocates were concerned that we weren't providing enough housing. And there was a lot of concern that the resulting housing that we were adding wouldn't be affordable to people earning a living wage. And we also sadly heard that, oops, I'm trying to click, that any additional housing would not be for Gloucester people, which is something I can't even really address. So I think, and Sean and David, please jump in. I did review this with them before, but what helped persuade the voters was a super respectful, fact-based tone. We always tried to be positive and debunk misinformation where we could, but validate people's concerns respectfully. We ended up with explanations in the simplest of terms. And what this really meant was that people weren't actually very interested in the details of the zoning plan, and they were in fact confused by them. And so really just cutting to the chase and saying what the zoning plan does and what it doesn't do is really what they wanted to hear. We also needed to reassure them that the zoning plan was designed locally, not imposed upon us, and it was designed by local people for the local people. And of course, trying to, as much as we could, share potential benefits, like hopefully affordable senior housing on the empty lot in Schoolhouse Road. And, the stick that 3A gave us was emphasizing the loss of the state grant funding, unless we were in compliance, which was unfortunate to have to use that stick, but nevertheless, it was very relevant, very, very, very relevant. So the lessons we've learned, to try to improve communication, to simplify everything, to explain complex zoning terms as we go forward, and to engage the public early and often. I know we did hold a lot of public forums, but I think we should probably continue to do that and explain things as simply in those public forums as we can, and have a lot of question and answer so that maybe we can address some of the misconceptions and concerns up front. To be proactive on the misinformation, we developed fact sheets that were really, really helpful. and a misinformation sheet that was also really helpful to everybody in terms of helping people understand what was really being voted on. Tried to make it personal, connect to the residents in terms of what they need, which is housing for seniors, families, workers, and just housing in general. And continue to emphasize that, it's for Gloucester residents by Gloucester residents. And that is all I have, unless anyone else has anything to add, an observation or a comment or something you think we should do or not do.
I think our biggest failure in this was not getting out in front of it earlier. Even if even if the planning board wasn't going to begin engaging in the actual zoning portion of it, I think we could have done more as a city to actually try to frame the discussion in terms of what it actually meant for Gloucester, as opposed to the sort of arcane language of the law itself and the guidelines, and which I think were confusing to a lot of people. I think they were confusing to us to a great degree until we spent the time wrapping our heads around it. Again, I tried to do as much as I could to educate myself about it before we engaged in it, and there was still a lot I learned going through the process of the minutia and the specific allowances or prohibitions. Like, when I had seen earlier that a 40R district could facilitate the 3A district, I thought that would be a great approach for us. And then I think it was at the first presentation by our consultant that a new 40R wasn't allowed in the district, but you could modify an existing 40R, which is something I didn't pick up on in the guidelines. But I think, unfortunately, going all the way back to 2021, when the amendments were introduced, the local amendments that we introduced back then, 3A came up into public view about at the same time, and there was confusion among those automatically. And I think going through that year-long process of that voting on the amendments and many of those failing, I think to a great degree, a lot of those failed because in the public's mind and some counselors' mind, it was wrapped up. Those were wrapped up in 3A, even though they weren't. And I keep telling people, go back to Plan 2001, and you can see the roots of every one of those zoning amendments that we proposed in Plan 2001, in our housing production plan. And again, unfortunately, we just failed, I think, to adequately confront the misinformation as officially as the city, versus having myself and a couple other folks typing away on social media trying to dispel those falsehoods. So I think on a positive aspect, I think the coming out of this or going through this, a lot of the opposition, as you mentioned, were complaining that we weren't spreading the burden around the city. And I think they said they would support relaxation of zoning more broadly. So I think we could use that as an opportunity to revisit some of those prior zoning amendments that failed back in 2021. I mentioned earlier when Suzanne was here, the two-family. I think that should be a pretty easy fix, particularly if we're able to have Suzanne explain that we really shouldn't have ordinances that conflict with state law after having gone through all this. And we know that does. We knew it did then. And unfortunately, that wasn't enough to have it changed. I think three-family by right, and a lot of the discussions I had going through this process, we talked with some of the opposition. I talked with some of the opposition about how spreading it around if a three-family home can be sited on a 4,000 square foot lot, there's no reason why a three-family home can't be sited by right on throughout all our other larger districts. That seems like a relatively easy fix. Um, Again, it wasn't appropriate to do while we're going through 3A, but given the fact that so many people in the opposition said they supported spreading the zoning around, and given that I think the folks who were supportive of our efforts in 3A would support the same thing, we can actually use that as a jumping off point to bring some of those ideas back and get them rolling again.
I agree, with caveat that I think we've learned both from the amendments that we did in 2022 or 21, whenever that was, and from this process that we need to keep everything in small chunks. So address one small issue at a time or one piece of the zoning ordinance at a time, and keep it simple.
I was really impressed and, oh, I'm sorry. And enlightened by Jane's presentation, particularly at the Gloucester stage, where she laid out some of the simple things that I found to be illuminating, such as the fact that the process before having the zoning by right was already a rather straightforward process. It was just a little burdensome, but it was anyone that wanted to convert pretty much could go through the process and convert, within the constraints. So that was illuminating. This is just a change, that incremental change to that. And then backing up, the first time I was exposed to all this was in one of the public forums. And I, being kind of a nerd, was really excited by all the algorithms, the changes that the board was presented with to meet the requirements. And I was really curious about that process, but I could also see how anyone who's not a nerd like me would be overwhelmed by all that. And I don't know how you could have gotten in front of that, because you could see that you were also, you also had a lot of work to do
I
to
was
work with
super
that.
confused at that stage. I mean,
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the state presented, I'm also curious about this still, about the state's process in reaching this, the way it works. It seems like it's well-intentioned and made to give lots of levers, as one of the consultants put it, to pull to make it to allow each locality to custom tailor it to their own needs and requirements. But by nature, then that makes it complex, right? You've got something with a lot of levers and customization. Well, you need to learn how to use that. So I think that was an initial challenge that would be really hard to get past.
I think that the real challenge that we face here, and we faced during this campaign, was one of communication. And that was your first point, Jane, in your summary. That so much of it came down to the discussion was occurring either through the Gloucester Daily Times or on social media. And a lot of the misinformation was occurring on social media. So that the challenge for us, and I think for the city as a whole, is how do we improve communication with the public? Even though we had as many forums as we did in doing this, and people are invited to be part of those forums, it was not enough. And I don't know what that mechanism is to improve that, but it is really one of the key things that we've heard both during this process, and I think when we get to the point where we're presenting the comprehensive plan as well, it's going to be the same challenge there.
First of all, I want to congratulate the Yes campaign. I thought it was absolutely pitch perfect with regard to the array of activities and the written materials. I really think that it was a winner, and I think we have a lot to a sigh of relief because the core group of you worked so hard to do it. So I want to thank you for all of that. Looking at this from someone who's come from a state, Oregon, where we've been doing transit area planning for 40 years, this particular set of regulations by the state were extremely clunky and very, very difficult. So from the get-go, we were handed what we needed to do was pretty straightforward. But with all of these, this percentage and that number, and do you include streets and don't you include streets? I mean, it was unnecessarily complicated in my opinion. And it ran into the buzzsaw of a traumatized community, having lived through the pandemic, very, very difficult political things going on nationally, so that we had a lot of anger from people looking for a place to dispense it. And so this, in a way, became, you know, the poster child for, I'm angry about everything, but this is something local. And remember, think globally, but act locally. That's what happened here. And I think that this process was the victim of that. Thirdly, the irony is we are not Weston. We are not Manchester by the Sea. We virtually met the requirement, right, for a minimum of 15 acres, 15 units to the acre in our zone. We actually made it with the simple issue of not allowing the 3 units by right. And in the end, after all the mapping and all the analysis, that is all we had to do. And it's a shame that because of the state's really clunky requirements, we had to go through these hoops that just totally confuse people. So this is what I'm going to suggest, is I think we should build on I think one of the benefits of having taken this to referendum, and I think maybe our opponents did us a favor, is they helped us build a case for why this is valuable and necessary. It's unfortunate that most of the really good written pieces that came out of this campaign were not available at the beginning. But you know, it was an evolutionary process for the city and the consultant as well. Gloucester, I'm sure, even for the consultant, was an unusual city because most of the cities they worked on really had to work hard to meet these requirements, and we were just practically there. So I think that we should develop a strategy for building on what we have now, the fact that 3A is law and that we comply with it, that what we really want to achieve in this community is not what people are seeing, which is not high-rise multifamily, with the maybe possible exception of a few areas like at the crossing. But it's really to look at encouraging that middle density that's missing. The middle density, you know, things from 10 units to the acre to 18 units to the acre, something close to what we already have in the core of this community. And talk about the benefits of, you know, of this, what they call the missing middle. And that's really what's missing in this community, is the missing middle. And we don't have the zoning to support it. That's for starters. The second thing is, I think we should look for opportunity sites. I think Shaw's all of a sudden is more of an opportunity site than it was before with the closure of Shaw's. I think working with the properties of the Gloucester Housing Authority, where you really are looking at the need to renovate and or build new because the housing stock's pretty old. And the fact is the opportunity to increase some densities there. And by definition, that would be affordable housing. To look at the opportunity by Market Basket for senior housing. I think we should play on our strengths, and we should go forward with the community looking for these opportunity sites that we can build some positive strengths from focusing on specific places that people can get involved in and look at what the options are and so on. And I just think we need to move forward in a positive way. one thing that is really difficult is that there are people, by definition, who really don't want to see any change. And when they say only housing for people who live in Gloucester, well, first of all, in this country, people have a First Amendment right to move wherever they want. And so to say we're bringing down the gates and nobody, we're not going to build housing if that means that people are going to move here is not a legitimate constitutional, political, or cultural or good social value. And also, a lot of the people who want to move here work here. And so because they work here, they have a right to live here, and they may not live here now. But if they want to move here to make their lives simpler so that they live and work in the same place and they reduce their traffic, their miles traveled, and their kids can go to school, we need to encourage people to understand that controlled growth that's well modulated and has, public input is of value to the community, tax base, supporting our schools, supporting our working, people who are working. I just think we should put this negativity behind us and start building on the positive growth from the referendum and choose some projects that really can make an impact on the community.
Thank you, Beverly. It's great. Well said. Anyone else? No. Well, that is a great segue into our next topic, which is a review of planning board initiatives. Planning board initiatives. I want to put the plan back in planning. And, but I don't know what to say about that. Greg, do you want to say something about it? Actually, yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to show your slide that you had from a while ago with your buckets. No? Okay.
I don't need
Just
it.
talk.
I think, I agree with a lot of what's been said in terms of, we need an opportunity, I think, to reconnect on just what the facts are, what the current state of the community is on a number of fronts. We know from the comprehensive plan that, probably 65-70% of the plan is some way focused around housing. It's either housing to support workforce. It's, what is that going to look like in 5 years, 10 years? Having done the housing production plan back in 2017, 2018 timeframe, it was an opportunity to kind of take a step back and really just have discussions about it. It's a no pressure. Let's all understand and identify where we are and where the needs are. And community need is the entire purpose of going through that exercise. Because I think some of the things that we heard throughout, this last 18 months, 2 years, however long it's been, there's different perceptions about whether or not there's actually a housing issue. And if presented with fresh information and even the data from the existing conditions in the comprehensive plan is a little bit dated at this point. There's always a 5-year lag. The next community survey, I believe, is coming out shortly, which will have a closer snapshot to real time to have some of those discussions about what the actual needs are and bringing everybody to the table. I mean, you pointed to it, David. I don't know how we can get more people to come out, and also be in a situation where at that first meeting, we didn't have enough place for everybody to be here. The tables. So, trying to figure out those ways to reach folks, going to where they are, I think, like the approach of meeting in the box, let people have those discussions, share those discussions back, meeting with different, with nonprofit groups that are engaged around housing and getting their perspectives because they're dealing with people on a daily basis, and trying to assist them with the issues that they're facing around housing. But I will just say, in terms of trying to move on things, quick, that all takes a lot of time. We conducted 18 meetings around 3A over probably more intensely over about 8 months, and still felt like we didn't get enough people involved in the discussion because, look what the result was. People felt they weren't included. They didn't understand it, even though I look at some of Jane's, materials and I'm like, I stood up there with that image of that three-family on Allen Street and said, this is what we're talking about. And still, up until 3 weeks ago, high-rise was still a part of the discussion. One of the things that I thought was valuable and David assisted with was showing people what the density of downtown already is and what it looks like. And I 100% agree with the way the guidelines were set up. It was just set up for tension. An arbitrary number chosen as a percentage of a housing stock, where if we had passed three-family by right, just in R5, not let alone any other districts, we still wouldn't have complied because of the number of non-conforming lots and non-conforming lots and other things that would be excluded in that. So it was unfortunate that for communities that have already done a lot in the housing space, we know we're one of the few communities that have two-family by right already since 1989. And multifamily allowed in 13 different districts. Many of these communities don't allow multifamily in any district, and they're still single family. So there was no recognition of communities and what they had done. There should have been some consideration for housing choice designation for communities that have been producing housing, at a greater pace than other communities, and really being a part of a broader housing solution for Massachusetts. So in terms of initiatives, I think, Alex has spoken at the last meeting. I think I mentioned it in the buckets. I don't think people like to hear another plan, but at the same time, we will have the conclusion of the comprehensive plan and presentation of that to the final plan to the planning board for your adoption, and then city council for recognition and an endorsement, probably by midsummer. But I think there's an opportunity there, and one of the things that we can certainly work collaboratively around is an outreach strategy to really start to get back to, this is what we heard, here's new information as to where we are, and really try to get, hopefully, 95% of the room to at least agree with where we are. Where we go from there, obviously there's going to be differing opinions, but it's, again, circling back to community need and what people, hearing those different stories and having, I think you need to hear it from the public. You need to have the public share their experience with housing. Because if it's all just in numbers and statistics, and that doesn't really resonate as much as I think, what you went through of being able to have those one-on-one conversations. It is unfortunate. Our door is always open. We did not have as many people come to us during the whole 3A process but every once in a while you did have that conversation. You said, and the response is, that's all it is? Like, that's all it is. We are working
Every time
with,
I went to a small group, that's what they
we
said.
are working with what we have, and what we have is more than 2/3 of the way there. It's just the particulars of the guidelines that don't have any recognition for what's already happened here, because we've been developing for 400 years. So I think the housing piece is a big initiative that I think we really need to develop a good strategy for how to introduce information, and really just starting with that as like the half step back of a renewal of where we are right now based on the latest information. And then in the mix of all that, affordable housing is the number one thing that we heard in 3A as well as in the comprehensive plan process. So some of those strategies have to be very clearly distinguished between what's around housing options, as Beverly pointed out, for kind of that, I don't want to use a new phrase that's going to get a target on its back, but missing middle, other options for folks, but also how we can address affordable housing. We can look at what we have for inclusionary. We can talk about specific locations and see if there's some public support around specific locations for potential housing options that aren't currently in our zoning ordinance. But I will say, we are recognized often as we have a lot of options in Gloucester that a lot of communities don't have. So that's the real challenge. With all that we provide for the different options to pursue housing in Gloucester, what is it that we're missing? What can we refine? I think the public hearing that we had tonight about one proposed way of trying to facilitate, I think it also goes back to, we have 3 different permit granting authorities. Often projects that have public support have to go through a year and a half, see each board. And if there's some simple ways that we could even just consolidate some of that permitting further. The 3-family being moved from the city council to the zoning board, where they get to deal with the issues that were raised in terms of nonconformity and the use permit at the same time, and not have this, I think, which was one of the potential goals, I think, of that proposal, was to try to not have to go to the zoning board first and just go for the use permit with some of those non-conforming structures. So that's a lot, but yeah.
What about,
Can you go onto the mic just
comprehensive
really?
plan is coming to fruition, and they're gonna have initiatives and strategies. And it seems to me that the number one priority of all the strategies is gonna be housing. Why don't we have like a symposium, just have like all the players, all the people in the room, and just jam on ideas, and just throw out stuff, and have it be educational, have everything be explained and brought out in the open, so that we can really think about what are available parcels, what are potential just bring it all out and start talking about it, and get some momentum going.
I have a suggestion even. I think that's a good idea. I think first I want to say that there's a lot of good information in the comp plan current assessment that really needs to be played up. First of all, there's 2 kinds of affordable housing. There's affordable housing that meets inclusionary zoning housing, the 80% of AMI and so on. But there's affordable housing as a matter of just bringing average housing costs down. And that's a supply and demand issue. And we cannot bring the cost of housing down in Massachusetts and in Gloucester if we don't have more supply. It's a supply and demand issue. And so affordability is really got two aspects, and it's big A, which is inclusionary zoning A, and just affordable housing. And we need to make that argument. The second is that family structure is changing. We have nearly the same population today as we did 20 years ago, but family size has gone down significantly. And so we now have a family size of 3.1 or 2.8, I can't remember the numbers. And it used to be more like 4.0, which is why we have losing kids in our schools, because our population's aging, people are having fewer children, blah, 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 blah. So the fact is, people don't understand that we have the same population, but we have more households that are looking for housing. This is just a beginning to, and the other issue is that we have a real mismatch between our single family supply and our multifamily supply, and the needs of and the sizes and the cost constraints of the households that are chasing housing. And so you can't even say we have this many units. You have to understand that the key is building more smaller units, by definition are less expensive, and which meet the needs of aging households, which meet the need of small households, with a divorced mother and 1 child, that kind of thing. So it seems to me that maybe one of the things to come out of this is some position papers that play on the data that the comp plan created, and have forums, coordinate with the Gloucester Times to run a series on the nature of our housing crisis, so that people can get educated. Then when they have some education and they understand then then have a you know, a series of forums where you have people, you review the data so that they understand what the data is, and you put it in terms of your children, your aging parents, the people who work in your schools, you know, at the hospital, that mow your lawn and that work in the stores and in the tourist industry, that these are people that need to be housed too. They may not say live here now because they can't afford to. And try to build more of a understanding based on facts and sympathy for the situation we face, and try to find a way of working for it as a community and bridging the no's and the yeses in a way that this process really, really, really divided this community. So, I mean, I think we can plan on a comp plan and do that. In the meantime, as planners, as the planning department and the planning board, we can look at some opportunity sites and excite people about some of the options that are presented. And so you have education on one side and real opportunity sites on another. And see, you know, and underscoring this is a comprehensive communication outreach that uses all forms of media and say, we really want to heal this community and move forward on the housing side. That's kind of how I'm seeing this evolving in my own head.
Thank you. And by the way, Doug, I wasn't pointing at you for any reason except use the mic so we could hear you speak.
I realize that, yes.
Go ahead, you had
But
something to say.
also what comes to mind is it not being just this city's issue, but it's a regional issue. And that level should be approached as well, you know, so that, I mean, again, people aren't just living here and working here. There's people that live out of town that come here. And so it is, you know, and other communities have different opportunities to meet some of these goals too. I don't know if that's far reaching, but.
Not to focus too much on the past and 3A and the problems with the way the state rolled it out, but you mentioned that the belief that the state didn't really give any credit to communities that have done more housing. And I think that that's not actually the case. The problem was the state didn't actually communicate it effectively, because, you know, we got credit for the Halyard by placing our zoning over a Halyard. And I think that's where the state allowed that flexibility for communities that have done significant development. They weren't overt about it, saying, hey, you guys have built a lot of housing, that's where you place your zoning. But that's the reality of the situation, that we have 200 units out of our total that we needed because we placed a district over Halyard. And currently there's an amendment going through the House introduced by the rep from North Reading, because he's upset that North Reading has done a lot of development. They have a 500 unit development that he thinks they're not getting credit for. They could get credit for those 500 units if they just place their district on top of that 500. So again, I think, again, not to belabor the problems with 3A, but I think that was a communication problem on the part of the state. They didn't explain that enough. And so that goes back to the anger over, you know, our senior housing projects don't count. Senior housing projects would count if you zone exactly for that senior housing building and just plop down a zone on that. So in effect, we did get some credit for what we've done in the past.
Yeah, I was speaking more to the fact that we have, for instance, 4 families on a 4,000 square foot lot. And it, under the scenario, that comes up as 0, because there's no potential, because it's sub threshold of, so that's what I was
Go
getting
there
at.
because it just starts confusing the issue all over
I
again.
know, but that's, so because it's, you know, most of these communities, they don't have anything close to a 5,000 square foot lot minimum. They're all at 10, 20, 2 acre. And so that's where I felt like, you know, we really struggled quite a bit because we have so many undersized lots, even by our current zoning.
Right.
So that was, but when you, if you took an area and calculated that density, we were way over it, but
Right.
running it through the model, it doesn't show up.
Right. But to your other point about, again, moving forward now, that's behind us. But I think that to your point about process and it taking some time, I think normally that is true in most instances, but in the case of those ordinances that have been introduced 4 or 5 years ago, if we pull those out one at a time to keep it simple, and again, the very first one, since Suzanne was here, uniformly treat all 2 families exactly the same, no matter how they get there. That should be the lowest of all low-hanging fruit. Again, but just one ordinance at a time, because I do, going back, when we put the ordinances, we dumped a lot of information on a council that wasn't really prepared for all those, to deal with all those changes at the same time. So I think we sort of have those in the back pocket to, again, host the public meetings, explain exactly what it means. Again, whether it's unified treatment of 2 families or the consideration for an expansion of 3 family allowances and broader community. But again, keep it simple by doing one piece at a time.
Well, and wouldn't, in the case of the areas that are now under the 3A designations, it would be, we treat all three unit buildings the same too. Wouldn't it also apply to the expanded in this area around the station? So it would be 2 and 3 buildings?
One piece at a time. Yeah, I agree, Sean. Yeah. Anyone else have anything to say on this?
I'm still curious about how the state came up with its actual details of the regulation and whether there was an interactive process with, let's say, at least a sampling of a variety of communities to say, how will this play out with you? With in mind the fact that a lot of our cases didn't get counted, and certainly for other cities, that's a problem that probably could have come up. I'm just guessing if the state had run it through sort of iteratively.
Station area planning, which is essentially what this is, has been done in many, many other states. They didn't need to recreate the what? The wheel. I'm getting old. And it was, I have to tell you, as a planner, the clunkiest set of requirements. It just did not make a terrible amount of sense to me as a planner. I have no idea how they came up. And
Well,
yeah, that was the big, I mean, from the get-go, that was the problem.
The good news is that hopefully the state is done and and we, all of the zoning ordinances or zoning changes that we propose or planning that we do or housing symposiums or whatever don't have the state involved in, except to the extent that we obviously have to comply with state law that already is in existence. But, we residents of Gloucester, the Gloucester Planning Board can, without the constraints of the state and the sticks that the state created, can create appropriate zoning for our Gloucester citizens. So I feel like I've heard a few things. One is some low-hanging fruit that there might be, and I know for my own low-hanging fruit is the cluster zoning versus the open space residential design, which is never used. Sean mentioned 2 family. There's also wanting to finish the housing production plan. No, sorry, the comprehensive plan, and seeing the strategies that come out of that. There's also probably some data collection to do about where we are in terms of, I'd really like to know, for example, how the ADU ordinance has been successful, how how successful the inclusionary ordinance has been. And also I talked to Greg about starting right now, counting how many permits we get for turning 1 or 2 into 3 families in the MFOD zones and checking in with that both in 6 months and 1 year to find out if it's really having an effect or not and how much production we're getting. So big buckets, data, low-hanging fruit, comp plan. What am I missing?
Cluster zoning.
Yeah, well, that's my low-hanging fruit bucket. But sort of actionable items. Yeah, go ahead, David. You have a thought? Add to that?
So when we were doing the signs for Yes for Gloucester for the campaign,
So wondering where you're going with this.
um, some of the feedback that we got about what's going on in Gloucester and the concerns that we have were over things like the development that is occurring over by Wingersheek Beach. That was an A&R development that construction started, the land was stripped of all the trees. And how many times I had to explain that that was largely an approval not required process that we had no choice about approving because, or endorsing actually, because it's a state law. But that kind of development really angers people. And I don't know what we can do about that, but if we're talking about initiatives and things that we want to include on our agenda as a planning board, you know, is there a way to say that within the amount of time that a plan has been endorsed, that construction needs to happen within a certain amount of time frame? But to see a site, and to a certain degree, this happened with Deacon Farm Lane. To a certain degree, those are the kind of things that I think really have a negative impact on the work that we're trying to accomplish in the city, because those are the things that are visible, right? And they see a site that is just stripped bare, nothing's happening, and there's large negative impact to that. So I'd like that on our agenda.
Is there anything that can be done about that whole thing? Because it is a nightmare.
In retrospect, no.
No, but I mean, as far as holding them to whoever's.
I mean, I think one of the things that, we didn't put up the slide with the buckets, and maybe we should have, but we don't need to. The other aspect was environmental permitting. And I think I pointed out at the last time that we talked about, you know, the different areas. We have come up with the situation where, depending upon how a project is proposed, it potentially has different standards applied. We don't have the same, for instance, stormwater regulations coming down from a larger project to a subdivision to something that's only in the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction and not a part of the planning board or city council or zoning board, and trying to unify that in some way. And I think the also what came up in that discussion, which leads back to the subdivision you just mentioned, during that, we had an issue where we started talking about whether or not we preserve any buffers potentially for the abutting properties associated with that subdivision, or looking at attributes on an individual lot. And I can remember very distinctly and clearly Sean saying, but we don't do that for anywhere else. Why would we do that here? Which is true. It would have been an arbitrary additional, restriction on that project. But there is the opportunity to think about site development on the individual lot. There are communities that have tree preservation bylaws or other site requirements that would have a review process and a conditioning of individual lot development. And that's one of those things where it would be very interesting, as we heard a lot about, not wanting to have things streamlined or loosened up. That would be moving in the other direction. It's not taking away any consideration for the size of a lot that can be developed or the density of a project that can be proposed, but it would get into, kind of trying to retain some of those attributes of a site than just the ability to clear cut,
Y- y-
which
yeah.
right now with a building permit, if you're not in the conservation jurisdiction, you can clear cut a lot.
And the thing with that specific area or topography is the topography. It's the ledge outcroppings, which when you're looking at, you know, an A&R, you're not getting that topo. So you're not having the understanding that you can't stick, you know, cookie cutter lots when you're dealing with ledge like that, aside from just blowing it all up, which you don't want to do. It's like a natural amenity. And you really have to work around that. And it should be a consideration in an A&R.
Right.
In a way, because you're creating lots, and if you're creating a lot that basically is a big, huge ledge outcropping, it's not really a lot. You know what I mean? It doesn't work that way. It's so extreme.
Which is a problem in our cluster. No, I mean,
Yeah.
zoning too, because,
Yeah.
you know, like in Bray Street, big problem.
I'm not suggesting that we solve this tonight.
No.
I'm just saying, I think it's an issue for us to get on the list. And I understand that we have limitations because it is Form A and A&R, but is there a way for us to work around that to set some limitations on it?
I have to say, it's just down the street from where I live. I have rarely seen a site that had such site movement in terms of moving stuff around. I mean, it's unbelievable how they have changed the topography of that site and then just left it sitting there. I mean, it's a disaster, but let's go.
Well, this is an old graphic. I was just bringing it up because we have talked about almost everything. And then Greg was pulling it back around to the environmental regulatory review, which we didn't talk about. But so what are some actionable next steps for everything we've been talking about? That's what I was kind of trying to wrap up. So there's like the low hanging fruit. That seems like stuff we can deal with sooner rather than later. There's more grand plans like having a housing symposium, which sounds like a lot of organization, and also probably might be something, sounds like an excellent idea, but something that maybe should be saved for after the comprehensive plan is finished so that we know what we're dealing with. And then there's data collection, which we could always be doing behind the scenes. And what else, what am I missing from what we've been discussing?
One thing that I was wondering, and it may be in the comprehensive plan, since you said so much of it was about housing, but we have the housing production plan that was adopted by the council in 2017, which made estimates of what the housing that we would need coming to 2020 at that point. Now we're 5 years past that date, but I think it would be interesting to actually see if we achieve those goals even 5 years after it asked us to monitor what we were creating and target that extra creation. Because I think, again, throughout the 3A process, I think people are under the misimpression that we're creating far more housing that we're actually doing. That people talked about, you know, thousands and thousands of houses created in the last 5 years when we see the developments coming through. And we're not a very busy board compared to, say, the ZBA, which is rehabbing places and doing things like that. New housing construction, aside from the larger developments in the context of Gloucester, you know, we did about 30 at Harbor Village, with 44 at the Old Y. We did do 200 at Halyard, and that skews the numbers a bit. But for the most part, everything else is, if it's a 6-unit subdivision, that's a pretty big thing coming before us. It's actually gotten completed. We've had some larger applications, but they haven't really gone anywhere or haven't started construction.
Yeah, we've
So
got a couple big ones that nothing's happened with them, right?
I just think that would be valuable information to present to the public that, you know, back in 2017, we said we needed this many houses to keep pace with housing, our increased housing demand. And that was actually drafted at a time where we were predicting our overall population to be on the decline still, when COVID actually bumped it back up. And we're probably, I don't know, been a while since I looked at, but we're probably 3,000 more people than we're anticipating being. And we've done less housing than I think we said back then that we need to do.
I hate that the number might be right, but I think it was 435 units. That was the number in the housing production plan of what might be needed over the planning period. Like you said, we're probably like 300 to in the 300 to 350 range in terms of multifamily that's been created in that time frame. So it's a little bit under. And so I think just from the housing symposium idea, absolutely the timing in that, and maybe it's obviously it's not just one. It's how do you translate this out with the intent of going back in and having a new renewed housing production plan. Data associated with that, we will receive state, regional, and local data. See how that pairs with our data that we've had to collect for housing choice, which is across all different housing types, which we received in, where are we in our designation? Can't remember if it was 2023, 2022, or 2023. And that was a 5-year look back at that point. So we'll add to that data set. So I think it is valuable for people to understand that, single and two families still dominate the housing type that's being built. And it's usually on the order of about 50 units a year. So, but really showing all of that information that goes beyond just, what's required in a housing production plan, but really to try to resonate with what predictions were in the past, where we are, I think would be helpful. Because I think at the time, people were like, 435 units, you're crazy. And here we are.
And the other thing to include in this information is, infrastructure, water supply, sewer, all that information. People ask those questions. That's one of the main things that came up, and understandably, we're in a situation where they're talking about droughts and so on and so forth, and that kind of information needs to be front and foremost, because people are going to ask that question, and they should.
Well, and this is the thing, it came up when you tried to get people to consider voting for that whole argument, it was going to double school population. Well,
And schools, same thing.
yeah,
School
well, school is
information
an
about the schools.
infrastructure, but that's why at the beginning, as a step one, the comprehensive plan rollout becomes the forum for presenting the information about where we are. And so, it's just a natural, and then everything else can come out of that. So whether you do a housing forum in the fall, or you do it at, before Christmas, whatever, to capture the information in the comprehensive plan and present it so that people understand what we're working with, number one. Number two, whatever the updates are, the reports on infrastructure. So what's happening with schools, I think we should look at what we heard from people that wanted them to not vote for this. I think we should build a positive case of data, and it's right, and present it as part of the rollout of the comp plan. And then you can go from there, any of the practical, whether it's introducing, bite-sized zoning, having a housing, doing an update of the housing, analysis of the housing production plan and an update of it. That can all grow out. But if people in the community do not have the basic set of information and we're all working with the same data, we're going to have this kind of stuff. And we've got the data because that's what the comp plan was all about.
Is it part of the contract for J.M. Golson for them to present the data to the public or not?
I think they've done that on a number of occasions, but there will be, two final presentations, one at the planning board and then one at the city council. So I think maybe we can certainly help direct the focus of that presentation, but maybe it is a little bit of here's where you started at the plan from existing conditions. Here's what you heard from the community, and here are the summary of the the kind of priority goals and objectives that were identified through the most recent survey.
I'm wondering about just forums for dissemination of data. I mean, it's great to think about, we could have a web page with some nice pie charts that summarize things and answer, preemptively a lot of questions. But the problem we've dealt with 3A is that a lot of people get their information from social media, which is it's sort of a electronic hearsay. And I wonder if we can explore things like having an Instagram account or having TikTok. Influences isn't the right word in this case, because it's but vehicles for communicating the way so many people get their information now.
One of the interesting things that came out of the campaign is that the subscription base for the Gloucester Daily Times is about 5,000, right? And 5,000 households.
Yeah, 5,000
Yeah.
subscriptions, and it's really, really expensive. So you can't ask everybody to use that as your data source.
Yeah, exactly. But that was where a lot of the information was coming out. If it wasn't, the alternative was social media, right?
Yeah.
So again, I don't know how to get around the problem, but that is one of the issues.
One thing I think too is we had a very organized opposition. I think we should challenge them to be part of the solution. And
Yes.
say, this was it's very unfortunate that this whole issue over 3A resulted in this enormous division in the community. We need to, one, heal that division, and two, we really need to deal with housing. And if we don't deal with housing, we're not going to deal with jobs and tax base and schools. It's really the heart of it. And we have this comprehensive plan. And, you want to be heard, then you need to be part of and see if we can pull them in.
So what's our plan? Rollout of the the comprehensive plan. Think about what to do after that and as part of that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think we should have a subcommittee that puts together the plan for the plan, just taking everything we've heard tonight and trying to put some structure around it so that we don't have to do it here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. That's
Yeah.
actually what I was going to get at.
Okay.
We do have the housing subcommittee, so we could task the housing subcommittee with making a list of everything we want to do and kind of prioritizing it or thinking about timing or whatever, like take some of the work, so that's not in this room by ourselves with microphones. I mean, public meetings, obviously, but
We'll be in a smaller room with microphones.
yeah, I know, but at least we can see each other. I'm like freaking my neck going like this. Yeah, what do you all think about that as an idea?
I agree.
I agree. In the comprehensive plan itself, there's the notion of a implementation committee, right? Who does things and tracks their accomplishments, the accomplishments.
But I think it is going to be a while before it's established. I think we need to act on the energy here. So I would suggest at least putting the planning board's plan together. A plan to plan. It doesn't have to be a 90-page document. It can be a 3-page document.
right.
But I think to wait for the comp plan implementation team
no,
would be at the
absolutely.
end of the- would be the end
Yes.
of the year. by the
Yes,
time that's-
right. That's what's my summary. Get the data, comprehensive plan, and a list of all the things that we might like to accomplish, in bite size, or subcategories or however we need to do them. Yeah. Okay, great.
How do we do that? Do we do that in
I-
these
do we have to-
meetings?
We don't have to
Oh,
vote,
the
right?
next
Or do
meeting?
we?
The three, Sean? and
You are
me?
currently the three of the
We're
subcommittee.
the housing
Okay.
subcommittee. And really, I think if we could meet and just start to put these ideas down on paper, I'm talking about like a 2-page plan to plan.
Distribute them.
Yeah, so
yeah.
it can be. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a consultant, so I know how to put this together. I can facilitate a plan for the plan. There's so many rich ideas that have come out of this conversation, and it's a matter of capturing them in a way that we can read them and feel comfortable with them. And I think it's really doable. Maybe even by the end of the month or end of May or maybe early into June. And I'd be more than happy to work on that, although I'm going away for 2 weeks in the middle of May. So
And that committee is limited to 3?
public meetings, open meeting law? Yep. I mean, although that you could have a public meeting and, people could come or not come. I don't know. You have to look at the, you have to look at the.
If more folks want to participate and just have a meeting focused on that with nothing else, we could do an off-cycle meeting as well. All we have to do is post 48 hours in advance, identify a location, a room that's available, and it would be available for the public to listen. But I mean, it's not a public hearing. You just have that discussion.
All right. I'd be
We wanna be
interested.
transparent. We want to be
being
transparent
involved.
because that's the argument that we weren't transparent.
I'd be interested in being involved in that discussion and on that committee.
Okay, but we already have, we've got 3 people, but, great, noted, absolutely. But you're saying since it's a public meeting, David can come anyway, right? And participate?
If we're going to have 4 or more, we would just notice as a planning board meeting.
Okay, but off cycle and
Yes.
not
Yep.
at this desk.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, let's make that happen. My calendar's pretty free.
Not all, but then I'd be.
We might continue in your absence, though. Beverly, is that okay? Can we have a substitute? Can we have an alternate on our housing subcommittee?
You can. You just can't have more than 3 if it's a subcommittee.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can notice it as a planning board meeting if anybody else wants to participate.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So, do you guys want to meet during the day or in the evening? And I'm assuming, Greg, this is with you in attendance, or does it?
I'm not here next week.
Okay, does it have to be with you in attendance?
As long as somebody knows how to start a hybrid meeting.
So
we can do
could
that.
Alex do that with us? Not
Or
Alex,
potentially can see
Eric?
if Eric or Alex can attend.
Okay, and for them, it would be easier if we were during the workday rather than in the evening. Right, I think we should just just get started. And we need your expertise, but we can at least put something on paper and then you can,
Well,
help
if it's
us.
next week, I can't be here.
I understand.
Following week, I could.
Yeah, okay. So maybe we'll take scheduling offline, and figure out a time during the day next week to get started. Great, okay.
I'll just note, if you don't make a decision by tomorrow, it will be Wednesday or Thursday next week because you
If-
have to post 48 hours in
Oh,
advance.
okay. So let's make a decision. Okay. Well, I have the grandkids on Wednesday afternoons. Thursday, I'm not available. How about Friday? Mm-hmm.
I'll be in New York
Oh, when are you free, David?
any day next week except Friday.
Okay, all right.
I'm just here Monday and Tuesday, and then
Oh my
I'm,
gosh. No. No. Having my mother's family reunion birthday party and it goes through till Monday night.
How does the week of the 12th look?
Shoot, okay. Yeah, I do think, yeah, I'm free Monday. I'm much freer that week. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, okay. Okay, this is kind of silly. Let me send out a doodle poll and we'll get everyone's availability and then I'll do my best to pick a time, a few times actually. So we'll try to put some like 3 meetings or something like that. And we'll recognize that not everybody can be at every meeting, but we'll keep moving. How about that? I don't want to wait that long.
I will be I'm volunteer to be an alternate, if.
You can be an alternate for me because I'm gone most of this month. So until the 21st. Well, you know how I feel about all this stuff. So
Yeah, that's true. I know, but we can use your input. Okay, how about this? Everybody email me with your vacation plans. Okay? Okay? Your out of town plans. And we'll try to mesh it with my mother's birthday party. All right. Minutes, actually, everybody.
This has been productive. Thank you, Jane.
You're
And
welcome.
Greg.
It's great. While Greg is looking for the minutes, does anyone have a matter not reasonably anticipated prior to the noticing of the meeting that they would like to bring up? Great. So minutes, and then we are done. I have read the minutes and I have no comments. Everyone. Okay,
Just so we-
can you scroll down so I can see the date? Yeah. I will accept a motion to approve the minutes of April 17, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Beverly Bookins, seconded by Steve Yost. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Awesome. The minutes passed unanimously. I will also accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
second.
Motion to adjourn made by Doug Cook, seconded by Sean Henry. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.